Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building. He's been on the program on the show before. We have the brother Bishop Barber. Welcome.
Man, I'm glad to be back with you all. Always on the Breakfast Club.
There's a lot going on in the last couple of days in the world, man. So let's start talking about it now.
Can I ask you a question, Rev? Let's start off with this, right? How did they ever expect the black community to heal when every day it's a new trauma? Every day it seems like we're on the receiving end of some type of police brutality or just social injustice. How?
Well, we got what we call DOTS, daily ongoing trauma. You know, we don't even have a chance to have post-traumatic stress syndrome. We got daily ongoing traumatic syndrome.
Damn.
And that's the real. And the problem, Doc, is as long as we keep treating this as an anomaly. You know, I heard a commentator yesterday said, we just got to get rid of the few bad cops. No, we got a culture, right? Because you take, for instance, what you saw with Brother Wright, who shot and dead at 20 years old. Now they're saying it's an accident. But what precipitated that even happening was crazy. Him even getting pulled over and stopped, you know, maybe a misdemeanor, maybe because some air fresheners were hanging in the back. But let me tell you one you didn't know about, may not know about, Charlamagne. In Virginia Beach, a brother named Donovan Lynch, who's the nephew of Pharrell, the singer, was shot by an African-American cop. And yesterday, his family had a press conference and said they have evidence now that the body was moved, that all kinds of questions. They're calling for a federal. So here you think about, you have a white lady that shoots this brother in Minneapolis. Then you have a white cop that lynches Floyd, you know, on top of his neck. And now you have a case in Virginia Beach where potentially a black cop, we don't know all the details, but there's so many questions around it, could have wrongfully shot. If we don't deal with the full culture of this, Doc, we can't heal. You cannot heal when this constantly happens. And I think there are a couple of things, Charlamagne, that's going to have to happen. Number one is, you know, insurance companies pay out a lot of money when this happens. I've said that, you know, maybe insurance companies ought to say, we're not going to insure you.
That's right.
If you're going to have to pay this from your actual dollars in your city, not the insurance company paying, but the actual dollars, because it would bankrupt some cities. The second thing is we need federal murder charges, not just state murder charges. Now, you take, for instance, right now in this case with Floyd, did you hear the other day when they said if the state loses, he can't be retried?
Talk about the Derrick Shaw trial.
That's right.
Okay.
Right, not the George Floyd, but the Derrick Shaw trial, excuse me. He can't be retried. Now, if he loses, the defense loses, they can appeal. That's because murder is tried at the state level. I think one of the things we've not asked for that needs to be on the table is federal murder trials when it comes to abusive police power, right? So that you're not just dependent on the local DAs and the state. And then the last thing is that we have got to start using the Civil Rights Act of '64, which already has a provision in it that says you can pull all federal money from any institution that gets federal money. You can pull all of that money if they in any way act in a discriminatory way. Otherwise, Doc, if we don't have some of these things, you can't really heal when you continue to be killed. You just can't. It's like you just don't have a break, man. You just do not have a break.
What's crazy is the Pharrell incident, I didn't even hear it was a police officer. They made it seem like it was the shooting on the beach.
Oh, no.
Exactly.
Yeah, I knew it was an officer.
No, at first they said it was a shooting on the beach. They didn't mention the officer did that shooting at first.
And I thought the same thing until the father called me to do the eulogy. And I said, what? And he said, and they also said he was brandishing a gun. Now that's in question. And even if, and he did have a permit to have a gun. And I mean, there's so many questions around that. There's concerns now whether one of the witnesses that came to help him got shot as well, and he ran away. And it's a black officer that did the shooting, I believe, and a white officer that was assisting. I mean, there's so many questions around it, which then gets to the point of culture, right? There's something that's terribly wrong inside of the whole policing atmosphere, you know, and you have to get at that. But what I'm arguing is Dr. King once said, a law may not keep you from make you love me, but it'll keep you from lynching me. And until there is serious things, and I think we got to up it, federal murder charges, federal, you can get tried at the federal level for murder. And it's got to be serious.
Names of two people who died in separate.
Yeah, I love the idea of federal murder charges. That's why even with qualified immunity, I think getting rid of qualified immunity is very important. Because to your point, like, man, when you start hitting these police officers in their pockets, where that money from those civil suits is coming from their pensions, do you think twice?
Right. It's a whole different ball game. If an insurance company says, look, if you have, you know, if you have too many wrecks, right, you can't get insured.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you hire a racist, it ought to be said, if this department hires somebody who's a racist, hire somebody that has any tendencies, and if they engage in the racist shooting, we are not going to insure your police department. So if something happens, you're going to have to pay that money from the city or the county or from those pensions. Those kinds of things would fundamentally shift the atmosphere and how things, and it would create, I bet you it would create a whole new training apparatus. Right. In this whole process.
What do you think about what's happening with the Derrick Shaw trial right now? As we've seen some of the people in the police department are even testifying against Derrick Shaw, and so it appears. Are you at least hopeful that there'll be some justice in that case, or do you think that if we get our hopes up, we'll be disappointed?
No, I think that's the other thing. You got to break through the culture, and that's a powerful sign when you hear a police persons willing to say openly, this was murder, this was homicide, this was, you know, not in any way, you're not going to hide behind the shield or hide behind the blue, as they call it. You know, everybody should be terribly, though, not discouraged, but I want to say something else, but since I'm a preacher, I won't say that, about this defense lawyer. I know he's doing his job, or supposedly doing his job, but this business of trying to turn it on George Floyd, you know, he even asked a stupid question the other day. He said, "Are you saying that but for him being restrained the way he was, he would not have died?" And the doctor said, "Yes." And I was like, "Why would that question was foolish?" Because that's what we're all saying. The man wouldn't have died if you hadn't done this. But for him trying to put it on his heart, put it on some other form, no, he was murdered. He was murdered in front of our eyes. He was murdered. But I am moved by a number of the officers. But you know, here's the thing we got to remember about the George Floyd. Now, all of us can talk about who's the hero and who stood with the family and all of that. If that young girl had not kept that video on, mm-hmm. and I've been thinking about Charlamagne and Brother DJ, what kind of trauma is that girl going through for the rest of her life?
I'm sure. Because
we can talk all we want to, but if she had not kept that video on, we'd have never known. There might not have ever been any marches, and because if you go back, you look at the write-up that they did in the department after it happened, basically made it all George Floyd's fault.
That's right.
So that young lady, and that's another thing, we cannot deal with this culture. And the only time it gets highlighted is when you have a video. Now in Virginia Beach, for instance, guess what? No body cameras. So in Windsor, Virginia, the lieutenant, you saw him, mm-hmm. where he was made, right? And he was begging, look, what's going on? What's the problem? Now they had body cameras on, but in Virginia, but in Virginia Beach with the Lynch brother, they didn't have any body cameras on. I mean, it's just too many ins and outs, and sometimes this, sometimes that. and it's just the culture is just broken.
What should the president be doing now? What should the president be doing now? I mean, because he told us a lot of what he was going to do when he was trying to become president. He was going to do this.
They all ran on the George Floyd Policing Act.
Absolutely.
Well, the president certainly should be. I think, again, that act should be strengthened. That's just I really believe we should strengthen it and put federal murder charges in it. I don't think that's in there. I haven't seen it. I mean, serious charge for murder. I think we ought to be pushing the corporate insurance companies on this matter. I think that we ought to really be calling on the Justice Department to use the Civil Rights Act of '64 to pull funding from any department that's engaged in this way and totally revamping these departments. But the president should be pushing. But here's the trick. Now, and it's not a trick, but here's the problem. You have this guy in the Senate named Joe Manchin. We elect him to be president, and he's saying that he will not support the filibuster. I mean, he will not support ending the filibuster. Now, every piece of legislation that we're talking about, because it's a 50-50 Senate, if you support the filibuster, then it can be held up, right? It can be held up. And the filibuster is a nasty, I'm gonna use that word this morning, that's a nasty law. It's not even a law. It's not even constitutional. The reason I say it's nasty is because it's been used to block, it was used to block anti-slavery legislation, it was used to block women's suffrage.
Civil Rights Act.
Civil rights, it's been used to block consumer protection, it's been used to block provision for the LGBT community, it's been used to block environmental protection. I mean, the filibuster has never been used in any positive way. In fact, y'all, you know what that word actually means in one language? It means to rob. One language, it means to talk to death. Another means it means to rob. So the president and others are gonna have to put a whole lot of pressure on Joe Manchin. Now, they used to have ways of doing that when senators wouldn't get in order, then they didn't get certain things in their state. But they got to put a whole lot of pressure, because what he's also doing by him saying that he will not break the filibuster, then we don't end up with any 50-50 votes that then will allow the vice president to make the deciding vote. So not only is he blocking real debate in the Senate, he's undermining the power that Vice President Kamala Harris has by not ever creating a situation where she can use that power.
And Joe Manchin is a damn Democrat too. And you know what, man? I've been in this state, and I can tell you that white people up in Appalachia and black people in Charleston, we've been organizing and fighting against him. He claims to be a Democrat. This man votes against his own constituency. That's right.
I was in Appalachia with some white women who we met with. We had a Moral Monday up there with the Poor People's Campaign, and they were having Taco Monday, Charlamagne. On Mondays, they sell tacos, and I hope sister's not offended by this. This is what they actually told us. They sell tacos so that they can help other poor white women afford their feminine supplies for their monthly.
Lord have mercy.
And these are women that's making $8 an hour, so forth. And this man, and they wanted him, they were begging him to support $15. And this man turned around and said no to 352,000 people in his own state that make less than $15 an hour. I mean, I don't know what kind of Democrat he is, but we got to put a lot of pressure. I'm going on with another show this evening to talk about pressure. We need to be calling his office, jamming his lines, because this man cannot take his one vote. If we're not careful, he can block the voting rights bill. He can block the restoration of the Voting Rights Act bill. He can block the infrastructure bill. He can block the George Floyd bill. All of those bills because of a unconstitutional rule called a filibuster.
I was upset yesterday, man, because I feel like leadership matters at times like this. And when they asked Joe Biden about the Kim Potter situation and her killing Dante Wright, You know, he said there's no justification for violence. You know, there's absolutely no justification for looting, no justification. You know, he said we need peaceful protests. I don't understand why they always make it about them goddamn buildings and what the protesters may be doing. Like, why not call out the police in that way and say there's no justification for police brutality, no justification for police violence?
Yeah. We better learn what Dr. King said in this country. That he said, when he talked about the Watts riots and all, he said it's the language of the unheard. He wasn't saying I agree with the violence. He was saying, don't twist the issue. Deal with the issue that is causing it. Deal with the trauma. People are traumatized, man. And this stuff hurts, man. I mean, I've got sons, my sons yesterday, trying to talk to them. You know, you can't, they said, Daddy, what the, you know, so and so is going on. And then they start, yesterday I was talking to one of my sons and he just started calling all the names from Tamir Wright. I was trying to talk to him. I don't want to hear it, Dad. You know, and I wasn't trying to calm him down, but he just literally started calling the name. And that's what we have to say, that listen, a badge, a gun, and the ability to walk in my house with a piece of paper and take my child to jail. That's how much power an officer has. You got a badge, you got a gun, and that's the only person in this country that can walk in your house and show you a piece of paper, a warrant, and arrest one of your family members, and you say, I'll meet you down at the station.
Damn.
That is too much damn power for a racist, for a person prone to violence, you know. And at first, you remember when this thing first happened, some people said about the officer said was an inexperienced officer. And I think I saw this morning, she's a 26-year veteran.
26-year veteran and head of the police union.
Right. 26-year veteran, head of the police union. Come on now. So at some point, we have to say, no, the first point has to be what you said. For any politician, the president, we have to stop this. We cannot continue to have this kind. And Doc, you know, and I'll say it on your show, and I know, if this was black cops shooting white folk, if this was black cops shooting white folk, or if this was officers of the law shooting wealthy kids.
Tarzan was trying to kill him.
All right. It would be a whole different response in many ways. You wouldn't have a bill held up in the Congress. You wouldn't have that. You'd have all kinds of protests going on. You'd have, you know, we got to get these black men out from under these badges. That would be the issue. And you've never had that happen. That's something we have to remember. You've never had in the history of this country black violence toward black officers of the law using their power in violent ways toward white people.
Yeah, because a black officer, even in blue, knows he don't trump that white.
Exactly. You've never had that. In fact, there is actually history, Doc, in this country, particularly when black officers first started getting becoming police. You know, that for first they couldn't even patrol white communities. They couldn't arrest white people. And there's history, I know in North Carolina, where several black officers, I know at least one case, but probably more, were actually killed when they were, this is back in the early 1900s when they first became officers of the law. So we've got to deal with this problem, not as some anomaly, but as a central problem to America. The violence toward our community, even if it's the violence that's hidden behind or violence perpetrated from behind a badge.
You know, nobody's talking about voting rights either, Reverend Barber. You know what I mean? We having all of these conversations about, you know, legislation that needs to be changed. Democrats going to fool around and never win another election if they don't pass some type of voter rights act.
Listen, that's another form of violence, Doc. And let me tell you, this is part of, and I wanna challenge on the Democrats, and also I want to challenge civil rights organizations and all of us. When President Obama won in 2008, if you remember, he won North Carolina, Virginia, Florida, which were unexpected. That's when we in North Carolina passed same-day registration, early voting, and he lost on election day, but he won doing same-day registration, early voting. Immediately after that, what did you start hearing? Fraud, fraud, fraud. Then you had the 2010 census. After the 2010 census, you had major redistricting. Then after major redistricting, you had the 2012 elections. Then you had 2012, and then in 2013, all of these states started passing. And since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, which had something, Charlamagne, called pre-clearance. Every law had to be pre-cleared, before it could be put on the books. We had 26 states that passed racist voter suppression laws. North Carolina was the first one and passed the worst one. Took us 4 years in the court to beat them because it didn't have to go through pre-clearance. Now watch me again. I want your audience to hear this. Ever since June 26, 2013, the Congress could have fixed the Voting Rights Act. Because when the Supreme Court gutted it, it simply said, Congress, you need to fix this. You need to change the formula. McConnell and his group have blocked now the fixing of the Voting Rights Act for over 2,800 days, over 7 years. Now watch this. We've had two elections, 14, 16, and 20. Fixing the Voting Rights Act has not been a major issue since then. Now that's a problem with the party. It's also a problem we have to say with many of our organizations, because we should have been in the streets about that. We should have made it a major issue. Fixing restoration of the Voting Rights Act. Now we have two bills in the Congress, okay? One of them is about democracy, one of them is the John Lewis bill. You are exactly right. We should be putting everything we have behind pushing those bills. Again, we can't let Joe Manchin be the one that blocks that. All pressure ought to be on them. But here's one other piece. Now you got corporations coming out and saying, speaking out against the Georgia law. That's good. You got people talking about boycotting some of them. I understand that. But here's the piece we better watch. Many of these corporations give social giving to Black organizations, but they also give to McConnell. They also give to the senators. If you give money to a Black organization, $500,000, $1 million, whatever, and if you speak out against voter suppression law, but then you still fund the senators that are blocking fixing the law, then you really have not fully embraced addressing voter suppression.
Right.
You got to pull that money. We got to challenge that the money be pulled away from all of these senators who are the ones that have been sitting on this for over 7 years.
Damn. Over
7 years. And we have to all get up, this has to become the major issue. We should not have been, when the Republicans were in office, so people kind of didn't push it, but we had 3 major national elections since 2013, and Voting Rights Act and restoration of the Voting Rights Act and restoration of pre-clearance was never a major campaign issue. And so here we are. So we can't do anything about the past, but we've got to fight like everything now, because guess what? Police chiefs get appointed by people who will get elected. Sheriffs are elected. A lot of whether or not we're going to have a strong police accountability bill, all of those things come through laws, and you cannot change those laws if you have people in place that will not vote to change them.
Now, let me ask you a question. I understand that. What is kind of confusing to me is like you see Major League Baseball pulled out the All-Star game, right? But The players gonna get paid. They're gonna get paid regardless. They go to another city, but it's the people that look like us that work the minimum wage jobs at the stadium that won't have a job anymore. Like the actors, they talk about pulling a couple of movies from Atlanta. That those are the people that work there that do the food and the runners and all of. They won't have any jobs, and those are the small people that need to work. That they need it because everything else is messed up. But business will still go on. Those corporate companies are not hurting, but who hurts the most will be us.
That's my point. And that's why I don't agree necessarily with that strategy. I understand you have to challenge corporations, and we should. I want to know, is the baseball commissioner still putting money in the Republican Party?
Right.
And in McConnell's cut. That's the list we need to get. If you move, they're gonna still, if they move to Denver, they still make money. But the question is, are the executives still putting money? Are they still funding ALEC?
Right.
That's the group, that American Legislative Exchange group that writes these bills. Are they funding McConnell? Are they funding all of these extreme right-wing senators? That's the question, because you can actually say I'm against it and I'm gonna pull out and still make the money, but you're still empowering the system. The system is the senators. That's the problem. And as long as you're still paying money, that's why if a group gives let's just say, for lack of a word, you've got the Black Civil Rights so-and-so organization. And let's just say they give $1 million to that organization, but then they also give $1 million to ALEC. They also give $2 million to McConnell and his team. Then you're not. That's social giving, but you're still undermining civil rights.
Right.
And so we've got to be strategic and pull that. Make folk ask that question. Take, for instance, like Jeff Bezos, on another subject. Jeff Bezos, made big deal last June that he was giving money because he was concerned about Black Lives Matter. He said that on one day. 2 days later, he pulled a $2 hazard pay from his workers. Right. Now, in his plant down in Bessemer, in Alabama, that's $26 million. So he said, I'm going to give $10 million to several organizations over here because I'm concerned about Black Lives Matter. But then he cuts the hazard pay for 5,500 Black people in his plant.
Lord have mercy.
And blocks the union. And, and denies them a contract. We have to be very strategic in how we are looking at this and really, really follow the money. And I'm telling you, you can move. You're not going to boycott every state. Right? That's not going to happen. So, but the question is, will they boycott funding the politicians that have literally not just voted against Voting Rights Act, they have blocked us even having a debate.
Well, I think that's what social media shame comes into play, right? Because we got to find out who these people are and who they're giving money to when it comes to, the senators and whatnot. Then we can put everybody on blast.
Let's do it. Let's do it. We got to find out, because you cannot, get up and say, "Oh, I'm against voter suppression and this law is horrendous and our corporation," and then we check around the back door and you still pumping money into the people that are doing the suppression.
That's right. Let me ask you a question. Rep. Why does it seem like this administration is dragging its feet in regards to fighting against all these voter suppression bills? Like, what action should the Biden-Harris administration be taking?
Well, there's a limit on what you can do with executive orders in terms of voter suppression. And because, remember now, the Constitution, those founders were slick now, particularly the ones that came from southern states. They mandated that voting rights and voter laws were primarily state issues. And what you have to do, though, is the only way you can get around it is you have to prove that the laws they're putting in place are violating the 15th and the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, or the 15th Amendment, which says no one can deny or abridge the right to vote. And since you don't have pre-clearance of the Voting Rights Act, you then have to prove that they are violating Section 2. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on Tuesdays. And so, so there is there's a certain limitation that can be done. Like the president can't go in and sign an executive order to fix this. What has to happen is, I think, is right now, for instance, the Biden administration is focusing on infrastructure, and he's pushing that hard. I think you have to do both and, not either or. And what I would say is that to tie voter suppression to economic injustice. See, that's the other thing. We keep talking about voter suppression as though it's just a Black issue. The reality is these voter suppression laws are targeted at Black people, but they also hurt poor white people. They hurt Latinos. They hurt indigenous people. They hurt women. They hurt the disabled. As one lady told me in West Virginia, they just don't want us to vote. And I said, us who? They said, us that believe in living wages, us that believe in civil rights, us that believe in health care for everybody. And we need to connect that. Dr. King did that in 65. He said that the attempt to suppress the vote is always tied to the aristocracy or the ruling class that wants to control the political power so they can control the economic power. So one of the things I think ought to be happening right now is connecting suppression of the vote to economics. In other words, helping people to understand, if we don't deal with this voter suppression, you don't get living wages. If we don't deal with this voter suppression, you don't get infrastructure in your community, in poor and low wealth communities. If we don't deal with voter suppression, you don't get more money for public education. If we don't deal with voter suppression, you don't get health care for everybody. And we should be connecting the two. And that's something that the president can do and the administration can do with the bully pulpit. And so that we understand that while voter suppression is targeted at Black people, it's ultimately an undermining of democracy by the ruling class in order to hold on to the economic power of this country.
Since you brought up Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we are actually examining it now. You know, when the Poor People's Campaign met with the policy team, we took 32 people into a video. Most of them were poor and low wealth, because when we go in the room, we take the people impacted in the room. And we took our attorneys and our our economists and public health specialists. And poor and low wealth people, when they were in the room with this policy people just before the inauguration, said, we need 14 things. I'll send them to Charlamagne and you can put them out. And the sixth one was, we needed a federal jobs program to build up investments in infrastructure and public infrastructure and climate resilience and energy efficiency. But this was the caveat, that targeted poor and low income communities. So now that the plan is out, number one, we're glad to see the infrastructure. We're glad to see the $2 trillion, but this is two things we're examining. Number one, is it enough? And we have our economists looking deep at that. Number two is, some people say, well, we need to do like FDR. We got to do better than FDR, because the New Deal was okay, but the New Deal left out Black people and brown people and women, because in the New Deal, for instance, if you worked in the agriculture area or the domestic area, you couldn't pay into Social Security until 1954. So that left out a whole lot of Black folk, Latino folk, and women, even white women. So we're saying it has to do more. And then we're looking at, is it going to target poor and low wealth people? So we're examining every line, because the question is, this is $2 trillion over 10 years. Is it enough? Is the investment deep enough? And is it going to be done in a way that targets poor and low income community and low wage people, lifting them up? We also believe that $15 ought to be added to it, that the infrastructure ought to also come. We can't back up on that. Let me tell you something. When those 8 white Democrats, now we knew what the 49 Republicans were going to do, but when those 8 white Democrats, 5 men and 3 women, during the relief bill, voted against $15 minimum wage. Now remember, Dr. King asked for that 57 years ago when he demanded at the March on Washington a $2 minimum wage, which would be $15 today. When that lady from Arizona did like this and did a little dance, that was the Friday before Bloody Sunday. When they blocked that $15 minimum wage, it blocked 40% of Black people coming up out of poverty and low wealth. 40%, right? That's not even including all the millions of white people. 40% of Black people, of working Black people, would have gone to at least a living wage, a minimum living wage. We got 62 million people in this country right now that make less than $17 an hour. So we believe, and we're still pushing that the infrastructure bill ought to also include the $15 minimum. The $15 minimum. And it shouldn't be over 4 or 5 years. It ought to be immediate. Because if we pass $15 minimum wage immediately, it would impact 49 million people would come from low wealth to a living wage, and it would pump $300 and some billion into the economy.
Now, Bishop, Barber, so in closing out, what would you tell our people to do? What do you tell our community to do? People are listening right now and they're saying, we don't know what to do. So in closing out, what would you tell our people to do?
Well, first of all, I would tell them, don't back up now. You know, we turned out in the election, but you can't, and that was a lot of turning out because you dislike Trump and his craziness, but we can't stop now. Right now, we have to be putting massive pressure on Manchin. Right now, every piece of legislation that comes out, even if it's Democrat, we still have to examine it. I don't know why people get mad. Sometimes, Democrats will say, well, wait a minute, we're doing the best we can. Okay, but we still have to examine every piece of policy and push for those policies to truly impact the bulk of our people. 60.9% of Black people are poor and low wealth. Any piece of legislation that doesn't address poverty and low wealth is not fundamentally addressing the issues that face Black people. I think that we have to continue to even as we're fighting voter suppression, we've got to continue to register. Poor and low wealth people now make up a third of the electorate. And I know that we're going to have to get to a point where we can really even more fundamentally determine who goes into office. But the thing I want to say is we got to be vigilant. I'm asking people to join with us in the Poor People's Campaign, where we're bringing together Black and white and brown, Latino and Asian and Native people around a clear policy agenda. They can go to www.poorpeoplescampaign.org. Join us on this June 21st this year, when we have a massive virtual poor people, low wage workers assembly moral march on Washington to get marching orders. Join us on Moral Mondays. Every Monday, we're now having Moral Monday, and get clear about where we are and the issues so we can connect up. Now, if we build a coalition of folk that will address, that say there are 5 issues we're not going to ever stand down on: systemic racism and all of its manifestations, systemic poverty, ecological devastation / the denial of healthcare, and the war economy. If we say together we're going to address those issues, we can fundamentally shift. We can build the kind of powerful movement, fusion movement, that can make our politics transformative. But I tell you, the one thing we cannot do is stand down. We cannot let an election happen and then we go home. I know COVID, we got to be careful, but my God, we cannot stand down. That is the worst thing, because I'm telling you, you thought 2020 was an election. You wait till 2022.
Wait till 2022. That's right.
You wait till 2022. And you thought that Trump was doing some stuff. You watch what people are going to find out now is, if you thought Trump was the problem, you're going to find out Trump was the symptom.
That's right.
And you're also finding out that we're going to have to, and I'm going to say it on your show. Now, I'm not saying it as the Poor People's Campaign because we don't endorse, this is me talking personally. We're going to have to primary some of these Democrats. Those 8 Democrats, man, that voted against living wages. And not only did they vote against living wages, let me tell you something that was even more, as they used to say back in the day, stank about that. If they had left the bill like it came from the House and didn't change it, then the parliamentarian could have advised that it not be passed. Guess who the power would have gone to? The vice president. The vice president could have overruled the parliamentarian, and then it would have required 60 votes to take 15 out. And they didn't have 60 votes. The only way they got to take that out was that they rewrote the bill in the Senate, put a new bill on the table. It didn't have 15 in it. The parliamentarian then therefore had nothing to advise against. That undercut the power of the vice president, forced it on the floor, and made Bernie Sanders have to put an amendment on the floor, but the amendment could be defeated by 51 votes. That's the other thing, Charlamagne, we've got to learn is the trickery, the political trickery. It's not always as simple as people say it is. And I know some of that's kind of complicated, you know, and people say, well, that's you getting down in the weeds. But let me tell you, that's where the snakes are, brother.
That's right.
If you're gonna get in this thing called political power and politics, you better get down in the weeds, because that's where the snakes are, in the weeds.
And we got to cut them weeds, man. End us in prayer, Reverend Barber. Let's get a prayer for the healing of our country, man.
All right. Gracious God, you have said to us clearly in your word through the prophet Isaiah that we have to cry loud and spare not. You have said that we cannot be repairers of the breach. We cannot be healers of the nation until we heal what's happening to the poor, to the least of these, to the broken, to the exploited. You said through your son, Jesus, that the only way we are sure that we are walking in the power of the Spirit is when we declare good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, healing to the brokenhearted, release to the captive, and the oppressed are set free. Enable us in every way available to us to walk in your Spirit. Give us the power to never be satisfied with injustice, and to always be determined with every breath we take to be about the cause of love, justice, truth, and transformation. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Brother
Thank
Bishop
you, Reverend Barber.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you all. Take care now.
All righty now, brother.